welcome to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be going over getting Klipper running on a mini PC. I've had a couple people ask me, how do you set up Klipper? What do I need to do? So this video is for you guys. We're going to be doing it using the help of the Klipper installation update helper. It is, if you haven't heard of it, it's a fantastic utility that's designed to make getting Klipper installed and updating Klipper as painless as possible. And I mean, it is painless. It is a super fantastic utility. Kudos to all of the developers, contributors for that utility. It's fantastic. But, if you have a Pi or, some other type of single board computer that you wanted to use, this is going to work exactly fine for you as long as it's running some flavor of Linux on it. There's nothing different about what I'm doing here versus what you would do on one of those machines. The big difference is probably the installation distribution that you use. I'm going to be using Ubuntu. You're probably going to need to use whatever flavor is built for your board type. What type of CPU it has in it, or what type of architecture it is. Anyway, if you like content like this, please like and subscribe. Really, if you like it, hit that like button. That like button helps me out more than you know. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get on into it. So this is the machine that I chose. It's the ThinkCentre M625Q. Now, they don't make these anymore. That's why it was so cheap. It was 35 bucks to my door. It does have built-in wireless. It came with 4 gigabytes of memory, which is upgradable. It came with 128 gigabyte SSD, M2 SSD, which is also upgradable. And for the price, you just can't really beat that. Now, the thing with it, it is going to take more power. I think that's the big argument people have between using, a Pi and or single board computer and, a mini PC. This is going to take 20 volts. Pi is going to take 5 volts. But for my use case, you can't really beat this setup. And specifically, this machine has a ton of ports in it. It actually comes with 6 USB ports. And I technically have 6 printers that I'm going to hook up to this. So it's perfect. One of them, is going to be running octoprint. We'll get into that later. For those of you who want to run octoprint. But anyway, it's a perfect setup for me. Now, if, like I said earlier, if you're using a Pi or using a different machine, all that's fine. It's not going to matter for this setup that we're going through. I just wanted to show you the machine that I'm actually going to be doing it on. So let's get to the next step. So I am using Ubuntu server for my setup. I don't need all the extra fluff that you're going to get in a desktop version. For anyone out there watching this, you can use whatever version you want to. You want to use Debian, you want to use Mint, you want to use Red Hat, Fedora, whatever. It's all okay. There's 1 or 2 commands that might be a little different in your setup, and I'll talk about them later on, depending on what version you have or what distribution you have. But the other key point here is I'm not actually going to go through the Linux installation. There are a ton of other videos out there that can go over that better than I will. So please go and find one of those videos for your specific setup. But generally it's all the same. You download the ISO, you burn it to a USB using Rufus or some other method, and then you boot your machine with it, and then follow the instructions. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about USB cables. So if you orient the cable like I show here with the block down, looking at it on the right side, you'll see I've got a piece of tape here that's covering that last pin. That last pin supplies 5 volts. Now I'm using electrical tape to cover that pin up. You do not want to supply 5 volts from whatever your host is to your printer, because your printer will then be powered at least partially by your host. Not good. You can damage it. You hit the power switch. Oh, it's still on. Why is it still on? Well, it's because you're supplying 5 volts to it. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with, taking a piece of electrical tape and covering over that pin, they do sell power blockers that you can get. But I just found that using the tape method is the easiest way to do it. Okay, so at this point we're going to assume that you have Linux installed correctly on your machine and that you're logged into it via some method as the user that you're going to use. I'm in as Joe Prince. Most everything we're going to do is going to be as a standard user, but we want it sudo to root, sudo space -s, and then enter in your root password, because we need to make sure that Git is installed. So we use your package manager to install Git. For me, it's already a part of it, so it's already there. I don't have to do anything. You might have to say yes here or whatever to get Git installed. We're going to be doing a lot of Git clones, so you need to have Git already functional. Once it's there, hit exit, and then next we're going to actually clone the Kiauh, I don't know how you say it, the Klipper install and update helper. I'll put the link in the description for the command I have here highlighted. That will actually pull the Git structure and get it installed for you. Kiauh, I don't know how you say it. But anyway, once that is cloned, then we're going to actually run the kiauh.sh script. There will be a kiauh directory. You can see it here. We just need to run the command I'm typing. And again, I'll put this in the description. And there we are. And this thing is a dream because it does everything for us. Now for us, we're going to hit 1 because we want to do an install. And then we'll have a bunch of other, commands we're going to hit. But first is 1, get us in here. And we're going to do 1 again to install Klipper. And this is where it'll get a little different for your setup and my setup. We're going to go with the recommended Python 3. And then this is how many instances of Klipper we want. This is going to depend on how many printers you want to run and how many can run on this box. I'm going to do 6 because I have 6 USB ports. That number might be 1, it might be 17 for you, whatever, how many you're going to run, that's how many you're going to put in there. And then go ahead and continue. Now it's asking if you want custom names. I don't. I'm not going to name each of them. I'm good with printer 1, printer 2, printer 3, so forth and so on. Now at this point, it's going to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and you basically just sit back and watch. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the fast forward so that you're not sitting here for 10 minutes. Okay, now it's going to ask us whether or not we want to add our user to the TTY or dialogue group. Just say yes. And we're done. Now moving on to the next section, we need to get Moonraker installed. So that's going to be the next item, which is item number 2. So go ahead and press that. It's going to see all your instances. It should already have your number there, so just press enter. And then say yes. And once again, we're going to let it go through and do its thing. And I'll fast forward again. Okay, and that was a lot faster. Now we need to get mainsail installed. You could use Fluid, but I'm going to use mainsail, so I'm going to hit 3. And once again, we're going to just let the script do its thing, and it'll go through and install everything that we need it to. Again, these are getting kind of progressively faster. Now at this point, it's asking if we want to install the macro file. We're going to say yes to this. Excuse me. And then it'll go and grab that. Wait a second for that to happen. Then it'll take us to our next point. Now we have all of that Klipper really needs. But I'm also going to install octoprint. So we're going to hit 6. Now again, if you're not going to use octoprint, you don't need to do this step. Entirely up to you. I do have one printer that is not going to be, Klipperized. It's going to stay on Marlin, so I'm going to use octoprint for it. Those times when I actually have it networked up. So again, you can skip this. Now, it's saying, do you want an instance of octoprint for each of your printers? I don't. I don't need 6 instances of octoprint running. I only want 1. Now, if you don't want to use mainsail and you want to use just octoprint for, your Klipper interface, you can say 6 or however many. But again, I'm not. I'm going to use mainsail for Klipper and octoprint for Marlin. So I just need the one install. Now, octoprint is going to take a little bit to install, so I'll go ahead and put you on fast forward. Okay, and that is pretty much it. So now we're going to go ahead and exit this, and then we will exit this, and we are pretty much done with our install. There really isn't anything else that we need to do on here. Now you can come in here if you want to update, you would hit run the script again and then hit 2, and it'll go out and look and tell you which ones you can update. I normally do all of that through mainsail though. Entirely up to you which way you want to do it. So at this point, now you need to go to your desktop, laptop, tablet, whatever it is that you're using for your web browser, and point it at the IP of the host machine that we've done all of this install on. As you can see here, this is what mine looks like. You should have a similar screen. This is mainsail starting up for the first time. It doesn't have any printers added to it. So that's the next order of business, is to actually click on the add printer button at the bottom of our dialog here, and then we're going to actually enter in each of our printers. Now, the host name IP is going to be the IP of your host, the mini PC or your Pi or whatever. So you go ahead and type that in here. Mine's 192.168.1.38. And then for the port, for the very first one, you're just going to leave it alone. Now for me, if you only have 1, you're done. Like me, I've got 6, so I've got to do this a couple more times. But each time I do it, I need to increment the port number. So it starts at 25, now it's 26. The next is going to be 27. The next is going to be 28, so forth and so on, until I've added all of my printer instances. So again, this is going to depend on how your setup is. This will just take me a minute to put all these in. And then once that's done, we'll move on to the next thing. And that is my last printer. Now I'm going to actually click on the first printer listed. And then that will open up mainsail actually. Now you can see all this red because yes, nothing's actually working at this point. And that's fine, it's all expected. And we're going to go down to machine because we need to actually tell Klipper what printer we're going to be talking to. You should see a couple of files in here. The one we're concerned with is printer.cfg. Just double click on it and it will open up and we can edit it. Now this is a basic generic file. There's nothing in it that we really care about at this point. we're going to get an actual printer config. For that, I'm going to go to Klipper's GitHub page, and under there is a config section. And then in it, you'll see printer configs for various printers you have. I'm going to be setting up a Sovol SV05. So I'm going to scroll down until I find it. And again, this will be different depending on what printer you've got in here. It'd be way different, and we're not going to go over printers not listed here. That's a whole other ordeal. Maybe I'll do one of those later on, but for right now, this just standard, printers that are already there. We're going to copy the entire thing. We're going to go back to main sale, and we're going to paste the entirety of it. We can get rid of everything here, under the cancel print line, our fourth line, and then we're going to paste in the contents we grabbed from the Klipper GitHub, which will be our entire printer config. Now this is a starting point. You're still going to have to do some setting changes and things like that, but this gets us where we need to be. And there's my config for my SV05. Now this section here, this tells us how to actually compile the Klipper firmware that we're actually going to put on the printer. We're going to load it via the SD card. Pay attention to this section. Normally every one of the printer configs, from the GitHub site, the Klipper GitHub site, is going to have this information in it. So we're going to need it. The other thing that we're going to need to change is this serial line, because this line actually tells Klipper how to communicate with the printer. But we'll go over both of these here in a second. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to need to compile the Klipper firmware itself, to actually put on the printer, and then we're going to need to determine the actual port, the USB port that our printer is connected to. So now again, like I said, we need to make sure that we understand these lines here that are telling us how to build our firmware. And then we need to save and close this file. And then we will move on to actually building the firmware itself. Now at this point, we need to go ahead and log back into our host machine, via SSH. So at this point, we should be in our host under our standard user. And in our home directory, there is a new directory called Klipper, which was pulled using the Kiauh, however you say it. So we're going to say cd to Klipper, and then from here say make space menu config, and that'll open up Klipper's GUI for configuring it for the various hardware. Okay, and in here we're going to go down to the second line, press enter. We're going to change this to STM32. Again, this is for my printer. It might be different for yours. Then we're going to change our boot offset to 28. And then we're going to change our port. And that's it. And again, this is for me. This is how I would set it up. Yours might be a little different, but follow the instructions that were in your printer config file. Now we're going to save this. Exit. Say yes. And then we type make. And now it's going to go and actually build Klipper firmware for our printer. And I'm going to hit, actually no, I'm not going to hit fast forward because this shouldn't take that long. And we're done. Now at this point, the last line is going to tell you that from where we are, there's an out directory and a klipper.bin file. We need to take that klipper.bin file and put it on an SD card. Now how you do that, that's entirely up to you. You can use WinSCP or you can just use SCP from here, or if you can put the SD card straight in your mini PC or Pi or whatever you got. End of the day, we've got to get that clipper.bin file off of this machine and onto an SD card. How you go about doing that's entirely up to you, but that needs to happen. Once that's happened, then you need to put it in your printer and then follow whatever instructions your printer has for flashing its firmware. Like for my SV05, I basically just take that file and put it on there, put the SD card in and turn it on. And then it's going to read that file. So look, let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to the next section. Okay, so hopefully at this point you have flashed your printer and your printer is on and connected via USB to your host machine. Next couple of commands we do, that has to have happened. If that has not happened, stop here until all of that has been done. Now we're going to look at dev serial. Now you may or may not have these two items in there. And again, this is going to depend on what distribution you're using. If you're using Ubuntu like me, you will see both of these. If you're using a different flavor, you might not have both. You might not have either. So again, it's really going to depend on which distribution you used. Now, either one of these will tell you the USB port that your printer is on. We can do it by ID, or we can do it by path. By path is better. And the reasoning for that is because it's going to tell you every bit of hardware that is in the chain to get to that USB port. By ID is going to tell you what we found at that port. So it'll say, here's the signature. This is the type of USB that's running on the other end. Well, here, I'll show you. So here's by path. And this tells you the bus and everything on how we get there to get to our TTY USB 0. And like I said, this is more specific. And that more specific is important. So say you're running two SB05s, right? They are both going to have the same by ID. So there's not going to be any way to tell them apart. By path will be different because it's going by the actual USB port that's on your machine. So again, a big distinction between the two. If you can, use by path. Always use by path. Now here is just a look at by ID. And again, it's going to tell you, we found this at this USB, blah, blah, blah. And again, if you had two SV05s, or basically anything that's running the same type of main board, motherboard, whatever you want to call it, in that printer, they're going to show up exactly the same. There's not going to be any difference between them. So, and that's not a good thing, because you want to differentiate them. Again, this is why you want to use by path. Anyway, whichever way you go about it, whichever one you use, we need to copy that and then go to our printer config that we had open before and put this in the serial line inside of our printer.cfg file. And this will tell Klipper how to actually communicate with the printer itself. Okay, so now at this point, I'm back in the printer config file in mainsail. I'm going to take the data that I just gleaned from my ls command of dev serial by path and paste all of that in here. So notice it's a fully qualified path, /dev/serial/by path/whole string. And that is our serial line. Then we're going to save and close this. Now let's go ahead and set our name for this printer. We go to the gears. And then under general, printer name, let's Let's type in our name for this printer, which is our Sovol SV05, and then just close it. It'll save it automatically. And now we need to restart our firmware. I'm typing this in the console. You could just click the firmware restart button. And then that will get us going, hopefully. And there we go. Klipper is set up and ready to rock. Now, one thing to note here, this is just a starting point for Klipper. If you're new especially, you need to go to the Klipper website and follow along with its installations and startup guide. So that'll tell you, check your motors, check your heaters, do all of the things that you need to do to ensure that your printer is working correctly with the configuration that you've told it. And if something isn't, then you just make adjustments to your printer config file. So let's go ahead and get over there and I'll show you. Okay, so this is the Klipper documentation website. Again, I'll put links to this in the description. But now, once you've got everything up and running, you need to come here and follow along with its configuration checks. It's a great website. They got all kinds of stuff on here, for installation and all that. And there, there's a guide for everything that's inside of the config, what you can put in there, so forth and so on. Fantastic site, full of knowledge. Read it. Go through this checklist. Follow each step and verify that everything is working the way that it's supposed to work. This is very important. If something isn't configured properly, you could melt your machine. It's not a good time. So again, I can't, emphasize this enough. Come and make sure your machine is working the way that it's supposed to. Good right here, calibrate your PID. Do it for your extruder, do it for your bed. Make sure you do all of these things. And then you should be off and running with Klipper. Okay, so lastly, I just wanted to talk about Octoprint because I did install it. You might have installed it as well. If you did, it will be located at the IP address of your host, :5000. That's the port. Octoprint should show up just like it did here. Follow through the setup wizard. It's fairly straightforward. Really don't need to say anything about it. If you have questions, just go to the Octoprint documentation page. Great stuff. They've spent a lot of time developing this bit of kit. It's really nice application. But anyway, that concludes our little run on how to get Klipper up and running and a little tiny bit about Octoprint. I hope you've enjoyed this, and like I said at the start, like and subscribe, and like always, happy printing.